So we're coming to the final part of our discussion this morning. And I'll start with you, Paul. What do you think that 2025 should be giving its attention to over the next 5 years, looking forward?
I guess, really, for me, there are three things that have emerged or been cemented in my mind as priorities over this difficult year that we've been all enjoying. I think they might have been different had we been doing this a year ago before the pandemic. But one is aging well. I think that remains a distant dream for many people, and many of us, looking ahead to our own futures. It's care homes have been high profile during the year for the wrong reasons, and I think unfortunately, we've had this defence from the government that we threw a protective ring around care homes, and it's painfully obvious that they hadn't. They also seem painfully obvious to me that they hadn't got a clue how care homes worked, and the difficulties around resources and so on. And I found that probably we ran a care home at North Wales Housing, which sadly closed about 6 months after I left. And it was run really well, but it was almost impossible to run in a sustainable way because of various decisions taken by local authorities, government, etc. And instead of making it easier and making it better, it just kept getting more difficult, and you could see that this may not be a viable business venture for too much longer. And I don't think that's changed. If anything, it's got worse. And you can't see people coming into the care home market to see opportunities there to deliver great services for our old people. And the best examples of that, again, are coming from probably the housing sector in that respect. But we really do need to get a grip of the aging well argument. I think mental health, again, I'm sure Margaret's probably better placed than I am to talk about that. But there at least has been a greater awareness of mental health and a much wider openness, I think, to discuss it. But we're still well away from where it needs to be, and with the pressures that everybody's mental health has been on during the year, it's just exacerbated what is a significant problem that's being stretched further and further. And then the third one really is, I guess, it's a positive one really, and it's about a generosity of spirit that we've seen across the year that I think we need to tap into really and make the most of. Individuals at a community level and organisations at the corporate level have been seen to work together in ways that we haven't noticed before. They really come together. I think one example with this being, for instance, in Merseyside, where I've become involved, all the housing associations agreed that in order to help the local authorities take homeless people off the streets, and in particular out of bed and breakfast and inadequate accommodation during the pandemic, every vacancy would go to homeless households. And that seemed a little bit revolutionary. It also put paid to the myth that it can't be done. You can't sort of deal with homelessness that quickly, but it's been very effective. And that's a good example. And something that somebody I heard saying at a virtual conference, organisations have had very little time to implement radical change, but they've done so. They've done so because they've learned to work at corona speed, which is I think the new term for the pace that we can work at if we feel we really have to. And I think that's been impressive. So what I'd love to see is that generosity of spirit continue beyond the pandemic.
It's wonderful. Thank you, Paul. And there's a lot to unpack in there. There's perhaps even another conversation perhaps between the four of us about that, because I think there's a lot to reflect on about what we've focused on during this time, and how urgent they have been, and how long term we can be with that kind of endeavour, really, and mindset. So I think that's really important. The points around mental health are also well made, and I'm sure perhaps Claire and Margaret might pick those up. Claire, what are your thoughts and hopes for the next 5 years for 2025?
I mean, I think Paul covered a lot there, so I'm only going to really just pick up two key things. I think one for me is getting our voice heard more so that we influence for change. And I'm saying that specifically because we've got a great moment in time in Wales. There are elections for the Senedd next May. And it's a great opportunity with a new government elected, irrespective of their political colour or who they are, to make sure that we get the voice of 2025 heard, and that we share broadly what we've learned and the good practice we've developed and the areas of change that we can be really proud of that we've influenced. And so I suppose the second point linked into that is to keep momentum going and to keep the practice developing on the ground. Because as Margaret said, one of the huge strengths has been all sorts of people from all sorts of organisations who have very different job roles and very different experiences coming together to change things on the ground that make a real impact for people, but also I think to be able to use some of the other people in the network who've got the ability to influence, to change practice inside organisations at a more senior level. That's been the beauty of it, is having all of those people in the room together, because there's always somebody who knows somebody or somebody who knows a route into something. So we really do have to continue that, because I think that's what's helped shape some of the successes.
So keep the community developing and growing and keeping that diversity in the room, because of course you can always lean to the folk you know, can't you, which is the other side, I guess.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Claire. Margaret, final word from you.
Reflecting on 2020, we're not out of the woods yet, but I think we're maybe coming to the end of the path, hopefully, fingers crossed, as we sit here on the 1st of December. I can sum that year up in one word, which is exclusion. And how lots of the cracks that 2025 committed to work in, which I think were probably hidden to a lot of people. Some of them were really old cracks going back many, many decades. Others, that intergenerational exclusion. Others were cracks which had been forced through the austerity of, it was the previous 5 years when we got going. It's now over a decade. It's about how we keep reminding people that, they may be okay even during the pandemic. Some people, lots of people have been okay. They've not been impacted by it. But I think a lot of people have, and in ways which are yet to reveal themselves. And I think what 2025 has a massive opportunity to do is twofold. Firstly, to hold the mirror up to those people who can help heal some of that damage over the short and medium term going forward. So I think Claire's point about influencing the small p political agenda is vital. And I think secondly, it is to use the evidence and the learning from both the work of 2025, but also stuff that's out there from previous recessions and other major society impacting events. It's not just the war and other things, to ensure that that learning's put into practice on the ground, so that we don't have other generations lost as some have been in the past. And I think when we looked back in 2015 at that data set around who was actually living in social rented housing or private rented sector housing, very often it was the people that were on the rough end of some of that dislocation that had happened over previous decades. So we've created challenges in locations that wouldn't have been there previously when it was easier to get social housing and you aspired to have it because it was a public good. And I think we need to be taking up some of that learning and making some of those arguments afresh.
I think they're really important and powerful points for us to end on. I think we've talked a lot this morning, haven't we, about the importance of purpose, about bringing like-minded people together, but not becoming too focused and too similar, so you might miss something. I think, you know, linking it to our current situation in terms of the global pandemic, the speed of change that Paul talked about, but also the final very important point you're making there, Margaret, that now some of the inequalities that some folk have known about for a long time are more exposed, are more clear, and sadly more people are probably going to suffer from those, particularly around mental health and well-being. We're seeing that already 30-40% increase in demands on those services. We're not going to go anywhere near addressing those challenges on our own, are we, either as individuals or as individual organisations. No matter how good we are, no matter how well governed we are, however well run we are, we've got to find a way of working collaboratively. And I suppose our journey so far in 2025 is that we've learned a few things along the way, good and bad. But if you are going to achieve anything, you need to work in a high trust and high purpose kind of environment and work together collectively and keep going. So I just wanted to end by thanking all three of you, not just for your time this morning, but the bravery that you showed over 5 years ago to begin this process. It is making a difference to people's lives, and most of the folk whose lives will have been changed as a result of this movement probably will never know you or know your name. So I just wanted to say thank you, Diolch yn fawr, Paul. Have a great day.